The tray in Lena Marsh's hands trembled for half a second when she saw the four men walk into the back room of Rosalinda's, because everyone in the restaurant seemed to freeze the moment the door opened. Forks stopped clinking against plates. A waiter near the kitchen door went pale and backed away like he had seen a ghost. Even the soft violin music playing from the speakers seemed too loud in the sudden hush that fell over the room. Lena did not know why. She had only worked at Rosalinda's for 4 months, ever since she moved to the city after her grandmother passed away. She still did not understand all the quiet rules of this restaurant, the ones nobody wrote down but everyone obeyed. She only knew that her manager, Paul Ritchie, had gone stiff behind the host stand, and that 2 of the senior waiters were suddenly very busy folding napkins that did not need folding. The 4 men settled into the private booth at the back, the one with the thick red curtain that was almost never used. 3 of them were younger, dressed in dark suits, watching the room the way security guards watch a crowd, their eyes moving, never resting. The 4th man was older, maybe 70, with silver hair combed back and hands that looked like they had done real work once, long before they became soft with age. He sat slowly, carefully, the way people sit when their knees ache, but their pride will not let them show it. Lena had noticed odd things about Rosalinda's before, small details that never quite added up. The owner never came in on Tuesday evenings, though every other night he wandered the floor greeting guests personally. Certain tables were never seated, no matter how full the restaurant became, as if they were being kept open for someone who might arrive at any moment. The kitchen staff spoke in hushed voices about a family that paid for the restaurant's protection, though nobody ever explained exactly what that meant, and Lena had learned quickly not to ask too many questions on her first week. She had assumed it was simply the way business worked in a city she did not yet understand. Now, watching the sudden change that swept through the room, she began to suspect there was far more beneath the surface than she had ever imagined. Paul appeared at Lena's side so quickly she almost dropped her tray. His voice came out low and urgent. "Table 12. Go take their order. Do not linger. Do not make conversation. Just take the order and walk away." "Who are they?" Lena whispered. "Just go," Paul said, and the fear in his eyes told her more than any explanation could have. Lena smoothed the front of her apron and walked toward the booth, her heart beating a little faster than usual, though she could not say exactly why. The 3 younger men watched her approach the way hawks watch a mouse crossing an open field. She felt their eyes on her, cold and assessing, but she kept her chin up. She had grown up serving difficult customers in a diner back home, and she was not about to let 4 men in expensive suits rattle her. The older man looked up as she reached the table, and something in his face was tired in a way that had nothing to do with his knees. His eyes were pale blue, almost gray, and there was a kind of hunger in them that Lena recognized immediately, though she could not have named it. It was the look of someone far from home. Without thinking, without planning it, the words came out of her mouth in the language her grandmother had spoken to her every single day of her childhood, the language of small kitchens, and Sunday dinners, and stories about a village by the sea. "Buonasera, Nanu. Ci volete stasera?" "Good evening, grandfather. What would you like this evening?" The old man's head snapped up so fast that one of the younger men half rose from his seat, his hand moving toward his jacket out of pure instinct. The old man raised one hand, a small, sharp gesture, and the younger man sat back down immediately, though his eyes stayed locked on Lena with new and dangerous attention. Nobody in the restaurant moved. Lena felt the silence pressing against her skin like a physical thing. She glanced around and realized every single person in the room, every waiter, every guest at every nearby table, had gone completely still, watching this one small booth, as if the entire world had narrowed down to this moment. "Who see tu?" the old man asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Who are you?" "Lena," she answered, still speaking the dialect, though her confidence had begun to waver under the weight of so many staring eyes. "Lena Marsh. My grandmother was born near Trapani. She raised me. She taught me everything, even the old words." The old man's eyes filled with tears he did not bother to hide. He reached across the table and took her hand in both of his, and the gesture was so sudden, so unguarded, that even the youngest of the 3 men in suits looked shocked, as if he had never seen this particular gesture from this particular man before. My name is Salvatore, the old man said, switching to English now, his accent thick, but his words careful. Salvatore Conti. I have not heard my island's own tongue spoken so well in this city in 20 years. Not since my wife died. At the mention of the name Conti, a ripple went through the restaurant. Lena did not understand why the name mattered so much, but she noticed Paul Ritchie gripping the edge of the host stand, as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. She noticed a woman at a nearby table lean toward her husband and whisper something behind her napkin. She noticed, most of all, the third man at the booth, the one who had not spoken yet, the one whose suit fit him like it had been made for exactly this body and no other. He was younger than Salvatore, but older than the other two guards, somewhere in his mid-30s, with dark hair and a jaw that stayed tight, even when the rest of his face tried to arrange itself into something neutral. His eyes were the same pale color as Salvatore's, though sharper, more guarded, like a door that had been closed and locked a long time ago. He had not said a word since walking in, but he was watching Lena now, with an intensity that made her stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Sit, Salvatore said suddenly, patting the seat beside him. Sit and speak with me. Forget the order. The food can wait. Papa, the younger man said quietly, his voice a warning wrapped in respect. She is working. She cannot simply sit. Nonsense, Dante, Salvatore said, waving a hand as though brushing away a fly. I am an old man with very little joy left in my life. Let me have this one small thing. Dante Conti. Lena filed the name away, though she still did not fully grasp its weight. She glanced at Paul, silently asking permission with her eyes, and Paul gave the smallest possible nod, the kind of nod a man gives when he has no choice at all. Lena sat. For the next 20 minutes, Salvatore spoke to her in a rushing mixture of English and dialect, asking about her grandmother's village, about the fish market she must have described, about the church bells and the smell of bread baking early in the morning. Lena answered as best she could, drawing on memories that felt suddenly precious, in a way they never had before, stories her grandmother had told her 100 times that she had never thought to write down. She told him about the small kitchen table where her grandmother used to sit peeling tomatoes late into the evening, humming songs in a language Lena had absorbed without ever formally learning it. She told him about the wooden rosary that hung above her grandmother's bed, and the way she used to describe the harbor near her childhood home, boats bobbing gently in blue water, fishermen calling to each other across the docks in voices roughened by salt air. Salvatore listened to every word, as though it were the only thing in the world worth hearing, occasionally closing his eyes and nodding, sometimes correcting a small detail of pronunciation, with a gentleness that made the correction feel like a gift rather than a criticism. Your grandmother, he said at one point, his voice thick. She sounded like a woman of the old ways. Strong, not afraid of work, not afraid of speaking her mind. She was exactly that, Lena said, smiling despite herself. She used to say that a quiet woman was a wasted woman. Salvatore laughed at that, a real laugh that seemed to surprise even him, and one of the younger guards glanced at him with an expression of open astonishment, as though he had not heard that sound from his employer's father in a very long time. Dante said almost nothing during this exchange, but Lena felt his attention on her the entire time, steady and unblinking, like a held breath. Once, when she made Salvatore laugh with a story about her grandmother chasing a chicken through a courtyard, she glanced up and caught Dante's expression before he could smooth it away. It was not suspicion, it was something closer to wonder, mixed with something else she could not quite name, something that made her look away first. The two younger guards relaxed only slightly, their eyes still scanning the room every few seconds, still alert to every door, every window, every person who came too close to the booth. Lena noticed this pattern and filed it away too, some instinct telling her that these were not ordinary bodyguards escorting an ordinary elderly relative to dinner. When Salvatore finally allowed her to stand and take their actual order, his hand lingered on hers for a moment. You will serve us again, he said. It was not a question. I would be happy to, Lena said, and meant it, though a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that happiness might not be the safest thing to feel in this particular room. She walked back toward the kitchen on legs that felt strangely unsteady, aware of every eye still on her. aware most of all of Dante's gaze following her the entire way. Paul caught her arm the second she passed the host stand, pulling her into the narrow hallway near the walk-in cooler. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he hissed. "I greeted a customer," Lena said, though even as she said it, she knew that was not the whole truth of what had happened. "That is not a customer," Paul said, his voice dropping even lower. "That is Salvatore Conti, and the man beside him is his son, Dante Conti. You do not know this name because you are new to this city, but everyone else in this restaurant knows it. Everyone in this city knows it. People do not speak to that family unless they are spoken to first. People do not sit at that table unless they are invited by blood." "I did not know," Lena said, feeling the first real flicker of unease creep into her chest. "I know you did not know," Paul said, running a hand over his face. "That is the only reason nobody in that room is more frightened right now than they already are. But Lena, listen to me. Whatever just happened, whatever door you just opened, you need to be very careful. This is not a family you want paying attention to you." "What kind of family are they exactly?" Lena asked, though part of her already suspected she did not want the answer. Paul glanced over his shoulder, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "The kind that owns half the buildings on this street without their name ever appearing on a single deed. The kind that other business owners pay quiet visits to before they open their doors, just to make sure everything stays peaceful. I have heard stories, Lena. I do not know how many are true, and how many are exaggeration passed around by frightened people. But I know enough to tell you that the son, Dante, is not a man anyone crosses, not ever. Not once." "He did not seem frightening tonight," Lena said quietly, though even as she spoke, she remembered the sharp, controlled way his eyes had tracked every movement in the room, the stillness of a man who had trained himself never to be caught off guard. "That is exactly what worries me," Paul said. "The dangerous ones rarely look dangerous when they do not want you to see it." But even as Paul said the words, Lena could not shake the memory of Salvatore's tear-filled eyes, the desperate gratitude in his voice, when he heard his own language spoken back to him after 20 years of silence. Whatever danger existed around this family, she had seen something real in that old man, a loneliness so deep it had nothing to do with money or power or fear. She finished her shift in a strange daze, aware that something had shifted in the air of the restaurant, something she did not fully understand yet. Twice more during the evening, she caught sight of Dante watching her from across the room, his expression unreadable, and twice more she felt that same strange flip in her stomach that she could not explain away. When the four men finally rose to leave, well after most of the other guests had gone, Salvatore stopped by the host stand instead of walking straight to the door. He found Lena stacking clean plates near the kitchen entrance, and took her hand again, pressing something small and folded into her palm. "For you," he said. "Not payment. A gift. An old man's thanks." Lena opened her hand, once he had gone, and found a small silver coin, worn smooth with age, engraved with a symbol she did not recognize, something like a bird with its wings spread wide. "That belonged to his father," Paul said quietly, appearing beside her again, staring at the coin with an expression somewhere between awe and terror. "I have worked here 9 years. I have never seen him give that to anyone." Lena closed her fingers around the coin, feeling its strange warmth against her palm, and looked toward the front door just in time to see Dante pause at the threshold and glance back at her one last time before disappearing into the dark street outside. She did not sleep well that night. She kept turning the coin over in her hands, kept hearing Salvatore's voice cracking with emotion, kept seeing Dante's unreadable eyes watching her across a room gone completely silent. She told herself it meant nothing, that it was a single strange evening that would not repeat itself, that tomorrow the restaurant would return to its normal quiet rhythm, and she would go back to being an ordinary waitress that nobody important noticed. But some part of her, the part that had felt her stomach flip under Dante's gaze, the part that had seen Salvatore's loneliness and recognized it as something worth reaching toward, already suspected that tomorrow would not be ordinary at all. She was right. 2 days later, a black car pulled up outside Rosalinda's precisely at 7 in the evening, and Salvatore Conti walked through the door alone, save for one guard waiting outside, and asked the host, in halting but determined dialect, for the girl who had greeted him properly. The host, a young man named Oliver who had only started working there a month before Lena, stammered through an answer and hurried toward the kitchen to find her, his face pale with the particular panic of someone who has just realized he is standing at the center of something far bigger than himself. Word spread through the staff in seconds, passed along in tight whispers between the kitchen and the floor, until every single person working that evening knew that the old man had returned, and that he had returned for one reason only. The entire restaurant went quiet again, and Lena, watching from across the room, felt her heart begin to pound with a mixture of fear and something else entirely, something that felt dangerously close to anticipation. She untied her apron strings and retied them, smoothed her hair back from her face, and walked toward the front of the restaurant with her shoulders squared, telling herself that whatever this was, whatever door had opened 2 nights ago, she was not going to be the kind of woman who backed away from it now. Salvatore's face broke into a wide, relieved smile the moment he saw her, and for just a second, Lena forgot every warning Paul had given her, forgot every ounce of fear the name Conti seemed to inspire in everyone around her, and simply smiled back. Salvatore Conti did not sit down when Lena reached the front of the restaurant. He simply stood there in his long dark coat, hands folded in front of him, waiting with the patience of a man who had learned long ago that some things were worth waiting for. "You came back," Lena said, unsure what else to say. "Of course I came back," Salvatore replied, his eyes crinkling at the edges. "I have thought of nothing else for 2 days. My son thinks I have lost my mind, coming here twice in 1 week, like some love-struck teenager. Perhaps he is right." He chuckled at his own joke, though there was something serious underneath the humor, something that told Lena this visit meant far more to him than he was letting on. "I would like," he continued, his voice growing more formal, more deliberate, "to make a request. I do not make requests easily, and I do not make them lightly, so please understand the weight of what I am about to ask." Lena glanced toward the kitchen, where she could see Paul watching through the small round window in the door, his face tight with worry. "Go ahead," she said. "I would like you to be my server," Salvatore said. "Every time I come to this restaurant. Not sometimes. Not when it is convenient. Every time." He paused, studying her face for a reaction. "I am an old man, Lena Marsh, and old men do not have many joys left in this world. Speaking with you, hearing the old words spoken with such care, it brought something back to me that I thought had died with my wife. I would like to keep that feeling close, if you are willing to give it to me." The request hung in the air between them, heavier than it should have been for such a simple thing. A standing request to serve a customer was not unusual in any restaurant, but Lena understood, even without fully grasping the danger, that nothing about this request was simple. "I would be honored," she said finally, and meant it, though a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning she chose not to listen to. Salvatore's face lit up with genuine joy, the kind of unguarded happiness that seemed almost startling on a man who carried himself with such careful control. He reached out and patted her hand once, gently, before turning to leave, his single guard falling into step behind him without a word. The moment the door closed behind him, Paul burst out of the kitchen, his expression somewhere between disbelief and panic. "Standing order," he said, running a hand through his hair. "A standing order. Do you understand what that means? That means every single time that family walks through this door, you are the one who serves them. That means you become a fixture in their world, whether you want to or not." "He is a lonely old man who misses his wife and his home," Lena said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew they did not capture the whole truth of the situation. "He is the father of Dante Conti," Paul said, lowering his voice even though the restaurant was mostly empty now. "And Dante Conti does not let anyone get close to his father without a reason. You need to understand something, Lena. Men like that do not trust easily. If his son allows this, if his son does not shut this down immediately, it means something. It means he is watching you too, and deciding whether you are worth the risk." Lena did not have an answer for that. She thought of the way Dante had watched her across the restaurant 2 nights earlier, his expression unreadable, but his attention unbroken, and felt that same strange flip in her stomach return. Over the following 2 weeks, Salvatore became a regular presence at Rosalinda's. arriving 3 or 4 evenings a week, always requesting Lena's table, always staying long after his food had gone cold because he was too absorbed in conversation to notice. Lena learned that he had been a fisherman in his youth, that he had crossed the ocean as a young man with nothing but a suitcase and a photograph of the girl who would become his wife, that he had built everything he had from nothing through decades of hard, unglamorous work. He spoke of his wife, Conchetta, with a tenderness that made Lena's throat tighten every time, describing the way she used to sing while she cooked, the particular sound of her laugh, the way the house had gone silent in a way that felt permanent after she passed. Dante does not talk about her, Salvatore told Lena one evening, staring down at his hands. He was very close to his mother, too close perhaps to talk about losing her. He keeps everything locked away, that one. Even as a boy, he kept things locked away. But you, he said, looking up with sudden intensity, you remind me of her a little. Not in the face, in the spirit, the way you do not shrink from difficult things. Lena did not know how to respond to that, so she simply reached over and squeezed his hand, and Salvatore seemed satisfied with the gesture, patting her fingers before returning to his meal. Word of the standing arrangement traveled quickly through the rest of the staff, and Lena found herself the subject of curious glances and whispered questions from coworkers who had never paid her much attention before. A waitress named Grace, who had worked at Rosalinda's for nearly 6 years and considered herself something of an authority on the restaurant's unspoken rules, cornered Lena in the break room one afternoon before the dinner shift began. "You do realize what you have stumbled into," Grace said, not unkindly, though her eyes were serious. "I have been here since before you were even living in this city, and I have never once seen that family choose a favorite. They come in, they eat, they leave. Quiet, controlled. This is different. This is the old man opening a door that everyone thought was sealed shut for good. I did not choose this," Lena said. "It happened because I spoke to him in a language he knew." "I understand that," Grace said, softening slightly. "I am not blaming you. I am only telling you to be careful, because doors that open for reasons like grief and loneliness can close just as suddenly, and sometimes they take people down with them when they slam shut." She squeezed Lena's shoulder once before heading back to the floor, leaving Lena alone with thoughts she could not quite untangle. Despite the warnings, despite the strange weight that now seemed to follow her through every shift, Lena found herself looking forward to Salvatore's visits more than she wanted to admit. There was something deeply comforting about his stories, about the way he treated every detail of her life as though it mattered, about the easy affection he showed her, without a hint of the calculation Paul seemed to expect from people connected to his family. If this was danger, Lena thought, it was danger wrapped in kindness, and she was not yet ready to walk away from it. Dante did not come with his father every time, but he came often enough that Lena began to notice patterns in his behavior. He would sit at a nearby table, ostensibly reviewing papers or taking calls, but his eyes would drift toward the booth every few minutes, tracking the conversation between his father and Lena with an attention that seemed far more personal than professional security would require. Once, when Salvatore made a joke so sharp and funny that Lena laughed loud enough to draw glances from other tables, she caught Dante's mouth curving into the smallest possible smile before he caught himself and smoothed his expression back into careful neutrality. She began to notice small things about him too, the way he always chose the seat that let him see the entire room, the way he never fully relaxed, even when the restaurant was calm and quiet, the way his guards deferred to him with a respect that went beyond simple hierarchy, something closer to genuine loyalty. He was, Lena realized slowly, exactly the kind of man Paul had warned her about, and yet the warning did nothing to dampen the curiosity that grew in her every time she caught him watching her. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after that first strange encounter, Dante approached her directly for the first time. Salvatore had excused himself to the restroom, leaving father and son's table temporarily empty of its most talkative occupant, and Dante crossed the room with the unhurried confidence of a man who never needed to rush. "My father has not laughed this much in 5 years, he said without preamble, stopping a respectful distance from her, "since before my mother died." "He is easy to make laugh," Lena said, though her heart had picked up its pace the moment he approached. "He has a wonderful sense of humor, even when he pretends he is serious." "He was not always this way," Dante said, and something in his voice softened, just slightly, just enough for Lena to notice. After my mother passed, he became very quiet, very closed. I worried, for a long time, that he would simply fade away, the way some people do when they lose the person who made their life feel whole. He paused, studying her with those pale, sharp eyes. You have given him something back that I did not think could be recovered. I only spoke to him in a language he missed hearing, Lena said. That is all I did. That is not all you did, Dante said quietly, and for a moment, the careful control in his expression slipped, revealing something underneath that looked almost vulnerable. You gave him a reason to want to keep living fully, instead of simply existing until his time comes. That is not a small thing, Lena Marsh. He said her full name the way his father did, carefully, deliberately, as though it mattered to him to get it exactly right. Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks, and looked away first, unable to hold his gaze any longer without her composure cracking entirely. I should get back to work, she said. Of course, Dante said, stepping back immediately, though Lena thought she saw a flicker of reluctance cross his face before he mastered it. Thank you, for my father. He returned to his table just as Salvatore came back from the restroom, and Lena spent the rest of her shift, acutely aware of his presence across the room, of the way his eyes found hers more often than she expected, of the strange warmth that lingered in her chest long after he had gone. That night, walking home alone through streets that suddenly felt darker and more uncertain than they had a month ago, Lena found herself thinking, not of Salvatore's stories or Paul's warnings, but of the brief crack she had seen in Dante's composure, the vulnerability underneath all that careful control. She told herself it meant nothing, that a man like Dante Conti did not soften for waitresses he had known for 3 weeks, that whatever she thought she had glimpsed was simply her imagination filling in gaps that did not exist. But 2 nights later, a small bouquet of flowers arrived at Rosalinda's address to her, no card attached, no explanation given, and when she asked the delivery driver who had sent them, he only shrugged and said the order had been placed anonymously, paid for in cash, with instructions that it be delivered on this exact evening and no other. Lena carried the flowers home that night, turning the mystery over in her mind, and could not shake the feeling that she already knew exactly who had sent them, even without a name attached. She set them in a glass jar on her kitchen table, since she owned no proper vase, and found herself glancing at them throughout the evening as she went about her small apartment, unable to focus fully on anything else. Her roommate, a nursing student named Claire, who worked long hospital shifts and rarely asked questions, noticed the flowers immediately when she came home near midnight. Someone likes you, Claire said, dropping her bag by the door and inspecting the bouquet with open curiosity. No card, though, mysterious. It is complicated, Lena admitted, and found herself telling Claire the whole strange story, from the first evening at the restaurant to Salvatore's visits to the careful, watchful presence of his son. Claire listened with wide eyes, occasionally interrupting with questions, and by the time Lena finished, her roommate looked equal parts fascinated and concerned. That sounds like something out of a film, Claire said finally. The dangerous, handsome son and his lonely father, and the waitress who charms them both without meaning to. Please tell me you are being careful. I am being careful, Lena said, though even as she spoke, she was not entirely certain it was true. Well, Claire said, settling onto the small couch with a tired sigh, whatever this is, it is clearly not nothing. Nobody sends anonymous flowers to a woman they see as simply their father's favorite waitress. Lena did not have a response to that, and she carried the thought with her to bed that night, staring at the ceiling long after Claire's door had closed down the hall, replaying the brief conversation with Dante over and over, searching for meaning in every word he had chosen. The following week, Salvatore invited her to something new. He waited until Dante had stepped away to take a call, then leaned forward across the table, his eyes bright with an idea he had clearly been holding on to for days. Come to my house, he said, for dinner, a real Sicilian dinner, the kind I cannot get anywhere in this city, not even here, not even from these fine chefs. I will cook myself. I have not cooked in years, but for this, I will cook. Lena hesitated, thinking of Paul's warnings. thinking of the careful boundaries she had maintained even as she grew closer to this strange, lonely old man and his watchful, guarded son. "I do not know if that would be appropriate," she said carefully. "Appropriate," Salvatore repeated, waving the word away like smoke. "Appropriate is for people with nothing better to worry about. I am asking you as a friend, Lena, not as anything more complicated than that. Please, it would mean more to me than you know." Looking into his hopeful, aging face, Lena found she could not refuse him, even knowing that accepting this invitation would take her deeper into a world she barely understood, a world that frightened everyone around her for reasons she was only beginning to grasp. "I would be happy to come," she said, and watched Salvatore's face light up with a joy so pure it made every warning Paul had given her feel, for just a moment, very far away. When Dante returned to the table a few minutes later, his call finished, he seemed to sense immediately that something had shifted between his father and Lena. His eyes moved between them, sharp and questioning, though he said nothing until Salvatore, unable to contain his excitement, announced the plan himself. "I have invited Lena to the house," he said, beaming. "For dinner. Real dinner. I will cook." Something flickered across Dante's face, too quick for Lena to fully read, gone before she could name it. He glanced at her, and for a moment his expression carried a warning of its own, different from Paul's, quieter, but no less serious. "You do not have to accept," he said to her, his voice low, meant only for her. "My father can be very persuasive when he wants something. That does not mean you are obligated to give it to him." "I want to come," Lena said, meeting his gaze steadily. "If that is all right with you." Dante studied her for a long moment, something unreadable working behind his eyes, and then he gave a small nod, as though granting permission he was not entirely certain he should be granting. "Then you will come," he said simply, and turned to his father to discuss the arrangements, though Lena noticed his eyes returning to her more than once for the remainder of the evening, watchful in a way that felt less like suspicion now, and more like something else entirely, something she did not yet have a name for, but recognized, somewhere deep in her chest, all the same. The black car that pulled up outside Lena's apartment building on Saturday evening was longer and sleeker than anything she had ever seen parked on her narrow street, and she felt the curtains twitch in at least 3 neighboring windows as she stepped outside in the dark green dress she had chosen after nearly an hour of indecision. The driver, a broad-shouldered man who introduced himself only as Marco, opened the rear door for her with a polite nod and said almost nothing during the entire ride across the city, though Lena caught him glancing at her occasionally in the rearview mirror, his expression carefully neutral. The house, when they finally arrived, was not what Lena had expected. She had imagined something cold and imposing, all marble and iron gates, the kind of place that announced its owner's power through sheer scale. Instead, the Conti house sat behind a modest stone wall, warm light glowing from tall windows, ivy climbing one entire side of the building in a way that felt almost gentle. It looked, more than anything, like a home someone had actually lived in and loved. Salvatore met her at the door himself, wearing an apron dusted with flour, his face flushed with the particular excitement of a man who had spent the entire afternoon cooking and was thoroughly enjoying every minute of it. "You came," he said, taking both her hands in his. Come, everything is almost ready. I have made too much food, but that is always better than making too little, yes?" He led her through a wide hallway lined with photographs, and Lena slowed her steps to look at them, unable to resist the pull of curiosity. There were pictures of a much younger Salvatore standing beside fishing boats, his arm around a laughing woman with dark curly hair who could only be Concetta. There were photographs of a boy who must have been Dante, serious even as a child, standing stiffly beside his parents in what looked like a school portrait. There was a wedding photograph, faded with age, showing Salvatore and Concetta on what must have been the happiest day of their young lives, both of them impossibly young and impossibly hopeful. Further down the hallway, Lena noticed a smaller photograph tucked in a simple wooden frame, showing a teenage Dante standing on a dock somewhere, squinting against the sun, a fishing rod in his hand, and an expression of pure, uncomplicated happiness on his face that seemed almost foreign compared to the controlled man she had come to know. He looks so different there, Lena said, pausing in front of it. Salvatore came to stand beside her, following her gaze to the photograph. That was taken the summer before his mother got sick, he said quietly. The last truly carefree summer any of us had. He used to laugh so easily then. Now he measures every laugh, every smile, as though it costs him something to give it away. He sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. I worry about him more than I let him know. He has built walls around himself that even I cannot always find a way through. She was beautiful, Lena said softly, stopping in front of the wedding photograph. The most beautiful woman in the village, Salvatore agreed, his voice thick with the particular tenderness that always entered it when he spoke of his late wife. Everyone said I did not deserve her, and they were right, but she chose me anyway. 43 years we had together. It did not feel like enough time, but I suppose no amount of time ever feels like enough when it comes to someone you love that completely. The kitchen, when they reached it, smelled incredible. Rich with garlic and tomatoes and herbs Lena could not fully identify, and she felt her stomach growl, despite the nervous flutter that had not left her chest since the car first arrived at her building. Salvatore set her to work chopping herbs while he tended to a pot on the stove, chattering the entire time about recipes his own mother had taught him, about the particular way tomatoes should be prepared, about the correct amount of patience required to make a proper sauce. They had been working together for nearly 20 minutes, comfortable and easy, in a way that surprised Lena, given the strangeness of the setting, when Dante appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had changed out of the formal suit Lena had always seen him in, and wore instead a simple dark sweater that somehow made him look both younger and more dangerous at the same time, as though the suit had been a kind of armor, and its absence revealed something rawer underneath. "Papa," he said, his eyes moving to Lena briefly before returning to his father, "you told me she was coming for dinner, not that you were putting her to work the moment she arrived." "Cooking together is not work," Salvatore said, waving his wooden spoon dismissively. "Cooking together is how you get to know someone properly. Come, taste this. Tell me if it needs more salt." Dante crossed the kitchen and tasted the sauce from the spoon his father offered, his expression thoughtful as he considered the flavor. "It needs nothing," he said finally. "It is perfect, as always." "You say that every time," Salvatore said, though he looked pleased regardless. "Because it is true every time," Dante replied, and for a moment, watching the easy affection between father and son, Lena felt something warm settle in her chest, a glimpse of a Dante she had not seen before, softer and more open in the privacy of his own home. Dinner stretched on for nearly 2 hours. Course after course of food Salvatore had clearly poured his entire heart into preparing. There was fish cooked with lemon and capers, pasta tossed with a sauce so rich, Lena found herself asking for the recipe twice, bread still warm from the oven, and a dessert made with ricotta and honey that Salvatore insisted was his late wife's specific recipe, unchanged in 40 years. Throughout the meal, Salvatore told stories, some funny, some tender, occasionally pausing to wipe at his eyes when a memory struck too close to the surface, and Lena found herself laughing more freely than she had in months, the careful boundaries she had maintained since that first strange evening at Rosalinda's slowly softening. He told her about the crossing he made as a young man, 3 weeks at sea with nothing but a single suitcase and a photograph of Concetta tucked carefully inside his coat pocket, terrified the entire journey that he would arrive in this new country and discover he had made a terrible mistake leaving everything familiar behind. He told her about the years he spent working the docks before he had saved enough to open his first small shop, about the nights he came home so exhausted he fell asleep at the dinner table, about Concetta gently waking him and guiding him to bed without a single word of complaint. He told her about the birth of their son, how he had wept openly in the hospital hallway, how Concetta had teased him for years afterward about crying more than the baby had. "She never let me forget it," Salvatore said, laughing at the memory, even as his eyes grew bright with unshed tears. Even after 30 years, she would bring it up at the most inconvenient moments, usually in front of guests, just to watch my face turn red. "That sounds like something a wife who loved you very much would do," Lena said, smiling. "She loved me enormously," Salvatore agreed. "And she was merciless about it. The two things were not contradictory in her. I have never met anyone else quite like her. Not before, not since. Dante spoke less than his father, as always, but Lena noticed him watching the exchanges between her and Salvatore with an expression that had shifted somewhere along the way from guarded to genuinely warm. Once, when Salvatore launched into a particularly dramatic retelling of a fishing story that grew more exaggerated with every sentence, Lena caught Dante's eye across the table, and they shared a brief, conspiratorial smile, the kind of small private moment that felt more intimate than anything either of them had said aloud. After the meal, Salvatore declared himself too full and too tired to manage dessert cleanup, and retreated to his favorite armchair in the sitting room, leaving Lena and Dante alone in the kitchen with a sink full of dishes between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching comfortably rather than awkwardly as they fell into an easy rhythm, Lena washing while Dante dried. "He has not smiled this much since before my mother passed," Dante said eventually, his eyes fixed on the plate in his hands rather than on her. "I did not think that was possible anymore. I had made peace with the idea that some part of him died with her, and that I would simply spend the rest of his life watching him fade a little more each year." "He carries so much love for her," Lena said. "It is beautiful, actually, even though it must be painful for you to watch." "It is both," Dante admitted, and something in his voice cracked open slightly, revealing a vulnerability Lena had not expected from a man who wore control like a second skin. "I lost my mother, and, in a way, I lost most of my father at the same time. He was different before, warmer, more like the man you have met these past weeks. After she died, he closed off almost entirely, and I did not know how to reach him. I still do not know, most days, but you seem to know exactly how." "I only listen to him," Lena said. "That is all I do." "That is not nothing," Dante said, finally turning to look at her fully. "Most people do not know how to simply listen. Most people are too busy waiting for their turn to speak, or too afraid of what listening might require of them. You do it without effort, without calculation. It is rare. You do not strike me as a man who has had much luck finding people who listen without calculation," Lena said, watching his reaction carefully. Dante's mouth twisted into something that was not quite a smile. "No," he agreed. "In my position, most people want something from me before they have even learned my favorite color. They calculate every word, every kindness, wondering what it might earn them later. It becomes difficult, after a while, to trust that anyone means what they say, simply because it is true." "And yet you invited me into your home," Lena said. "My father invited you," Dante corrected, though the corner of his mouth twitched upward slightly. "I merely did not stop him, though I admit, watching you these past weeks, I stopped wanting to stop him rather quickly." Lena felt her cheeks warm at that, and she busied herself with the dishes again, unsure how to respond to an admission so unexpectedly direct from a man who had spent every previous encounter guarding his words so carefully. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the space between them charged with something neither of them had acknowledged directly until now. Lena set down the plate she had been washing and turned to face him fully, water dripping from her hands, her heart beating fast in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Why did you let this happen?" she asked quietly. "You could have stopped it. You could have told your father to leave me alone at the restaurant, could have made sure I never crossed paths with either of you again. Why didn't you?" Dante was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as though he were choosing his words with unusual care. "Because I did not want to," he said finally. "Because watching my father come back to life these past weeks has been the greatest gift I have received in years, and I was not willing to take that away from him simply because it might be safer to do so." He paused, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And because, if I am honest, I found myself looking forward to seeing you as much as he did, for reasons that had very little to do with my father at all." Before Lena could respond, the doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected, cutting through the charged silence between them. Dante's expression shifted instantly, the softness disappearing behind a wall of alert focus, and he set down the dish towel he had been holding with careful deliberation. "Stay here," he said, his voice low and controlled, in a way that sent a different kind of chill through Lena's chest. He moved toward the front of the house with the same unhurried confidence she had noticed the very first night, though now she recognized it as something more purposeful, more prepared. Lena stood frozen in the kitchen, straining to hear the low murmur of voices at the door, unable to make out words but catching the tension in the tone, the way Dante's voice had dropped into something clipped and serious. Salvatore appeared in the kitchen doorway a moment later, his earlier warmth replaced by a wariness that aged his face by years in an instant. "Go to the back room, Lena," he said quietly, all traces of his earlier joy gone from his voice. "Please, now." "What is happening?" Lena asked, though something in Salvatore's expression told her she already knew the answer would not be simple. "Someone has taken an interest in you," Salvatore said, glancing toward the front hallway, where Dante's voice had grown quieter, more controlled, more dangerous. "Someone who should not have. Please, go to the back room. I will explain everything soon, but right now, I need you somewhere safe." Lena's heart pounded as she moved toward the back of the house, Salvatore's hand gentle but firm on her shoulder guiding her along, and she understood, with sudden and complete clarity, that whatever quiet, comfortable world she had stumbled into over these past weeks, it had just collided directly with the danger everyone around her had been warning her about from the very beginning. The back room turned out to be a small study lined with books, and Salvatore guided her inside before pulling the door nearly closed, leaving only a thin gap through which the low murmur of voices from the front hall still reached her. She strained to listen, catching fragments of a conversation that grew tenser with every exchange, Dante's voice controlled but edged with something hard and cold that she had not heard from him before, and a second voice, unfamiliar, smooth in a way that felt deliberately provoking rather than genuinely calm. She could not make out full sentences, only scattered words, something about territory, something about respect, something about a name she did not recognize spoken with unmistakable contempt. Salvatore stood near the study door, his earlier warmth entirely gone, replaced by the alert stillness of a man who had lived through danger before and knew exactly how seriously to take it now. "Who is that?" Lena whispered. "Someone who wishes my family did not exist," Salvatore said quietly, his eyes fixed on the thin gap in the door. "Someone who has been circling for a long time, waiting for a reason to move closer. I fear he may have just found one." The front door closed with a heavy, final sound a few minutes later, and Lena heard Dante's footsteps approaching the study, slower and heavier than his usual confident stride. When he pushed the door open fully, his face had lost every trace of the warmth she had glimpsed in the kitchen, replaced by a hardness that made him look, for the first time since she had met him, exactly as dangerous as everyone had always warned her he could be. "We need to talk," he said, his eyes finding hers across the small room. "About what just happened, and about what it means for you now." Dante led Lena into a small sitting room off the study, closing the door firmly behind them before he spoke again, his voice tight with a control that seemed to cost him real effort to maintain. "The man who came to the door works for a family called Moretti," he said. "They have wanted my father's territory for years, ever since I took over the business from him, and they decided a younger man might be easier to push around than an old one. They have never had the courage to move against us directly, until tonight." "What did he want?" Lena asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "He wanted me to know that he had noticed you," Dante said, and something in his tone made the words land like a physical blow. "He wanted me to know that a woman who has become important to my father, a woman who is not protected by our name or our history, is a far easier target than either of us. He did not threaten you directly. Men like him rarely do. But the message was clear enough." He began pacing the small room, his movements sharp and restless, so different from his usual controlled stillness that Lena found herself watching him with growing alarm. "The Moretti family has been circling for 2 years," he continued, "ever since my father stepped back from the business, and I took full control. They tested me early, small provocations, minor disputes over territory that meant little in themselves, but were designed to see how I would respond. I responded carefully, deliberately, refusing to give them the open conflict they wanted, because open conflict brings attention, and attention brings consequences none of us want. I thought that restraint was working. I thought I had convinced them that patience served everyone better than war. And now, Lena asked. And now they have found a different kind of pressure to apply, Dante said, stopping his pacing to face her directly. Not against me. Not against my father, who is protected by decades of reputation, even his enemies respect. Against someone soft, someone unprotected, someone whose only crime was speaking a beautiful language to a lonely old man. His voice cracked slightly on the last words, the first real fracture Lena had seen in his composure since she had known him. Lena's stomach dropped. He wants to use me against you. Yes, Dante said, and the single word carried a weight that made the danger suddenly, completely real, in a way it had not felt until this exact moment. I should never have allowed this to go this far. I told myself it was harmless, that my father's happiness was worth the small risk of drawing attention to you. But I was wrong. I let my own feelings cloud my judgment, and now you are in danger because of choices I should have made differently from the start. You did not force me to come here, Lena said. I chose this. I chose to come to your father's house. I chose to keep serving him. I chose all of it. That does not change the fact that I should have protected you better, Dante said, running a hand through his hair, the gesture so unlike his usual careful composure that it frightened Lena more than his words had. I need to make arrangements. Guards outside your apartment, someone watching you when you leave for work, until this situation is resolved. I know it will feel like a cage. I am sorry for that. But I cannot risk anything happening to you, because I was too selfish to send you away when I had the chance. Do you want to send me away? Lena asked quietly, watching his face for the answer before he could speak it aloud. Dante was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch in her chest. No, he admitted finally, the word rough, almost reluctant, as though it cost him something to say it plainly. I do not want to send you away. That is precisely the problem. I have spent weeks telling myself that my interest in you was only about my father's happiness, but that was never entirely true, and pretending otherwise now would be a lie neither of us deserves. The air between them felt charged, heavy with everything neither of them had said directly, until this moment of danger forced the truth into the open. Lena took a step closer, unwilling to let fear be the only thing that defined this conversation. I have watched you fight against this for weeks, she said. Every time your father invited me somewhere, every time I caught you looking at me across a room, you pulled back immediately, as though allowing yourself to feel anything was a mistake you could not afford. I understand why. I understand what your life demands of you. But I am tired of watching you deny something that is clearly there, especially now, when pretending costs us both more than honesty would. You do not know what you are asking me to risk, Dante said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier hardness, replaced by something rawer, more uncertain. Every person who has ever mattered to me in this life has become a target because of who I am. My mother lived her whole life shielded from the worst of it, and even then, the stress of it wore her down years before her body finally gave out. I watched my father grieve, not only her death, but every quiet sacrifice she made to survive being married to a man like him. I do not know how to ask that of someone else. I do not know if I even have the right to ask it. You are not asking, Lena said gently. I am offering. There is a difference, Dante. I have seen exactly what this world costs. Tonight more than ever. And I am still standing here. That should tell you something. Then do not send me away, she said. Protect me if you must. Put guards outside my apartment. Do whatever you need to do to keep everyone safe. But do not push me out of your life, because you are afraid of what it might cost you to let me stay in it. Dante closed the remaining distance between them in a single step, his hand coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that seemed almost impossible given everything Lena had heard about him, given the hardness she had glimpsed in his eyes only minutes earlier when he confronted the man at the door. You do not understand what you are asking, he said quietly. The life I lead is not safe. It has never been safe, and it will not become safe simply because I wish it were different. If you stay close to me, the danger does not disappear. It only grows more personal. I understand more than you think, Lena said. I have watched you with your father for weeks now. I have seen the man underneath all the danger, the one who cries a little when his father tells stories about his mother, the one who softens the moment he walks through his own front door. I am not asking you to be safe, Dante. I am asking you to let me stay, danger and all." Something in Dante's expression broke open at that, the careful control he had maintained for so long finally giving way, and he leaned down to press his forehead against hers, his breath unsteady in a way that told Lena exactly how much restraint this moment was costing him. "I have wanted to do this since the first night you sat with my father and made him laugh for the first time in years," he said softly. "I told myself it was inappropriate, that you deserved better than to be pulled into this world, that I should keep my distance for your own sake. I am finding it very difficult to remember why any of that mattered right now." Before Lena could respond, Salvatore's voice called from the hallway, urgent and sharp in a way that shattered the moment entirely. "Dante, come quickly. There is a car outside, moving slowly. It has passed the house twice already." Dante's expression hardened instantly, the tenderness of a moment ago replaced by cold, immediate focus. He guided Lena firmly behind him and moved toward the front window, where Salvatore stood watching through a narrow gap in the curtains, his face tense with old, familiar wariness. "It is them," Salvatore said quietly. "I recognize the car. They are not even trying to hide it. That is the message itself." Dante pulled out his phone and made a call, his voice clipped and controlled as he issued instructions to someone on the other end, arranging additional security, arranging for the car outside to be watched and identified, arranging for Lena to be escorted home only once the situation had been fully assessed. Lena stood in the hallway, watching this efficient, dangerous version of him take charge, and understood with sudden clarity just how much of his life existed in this particular register, calm and controlled even in the face of real threat. "You cannot go home tonight," Dante said, ending his call and turning back to her. "Not until we know it is safe. I am sorry. I know this is not what you agreed to when you accepted my father's invitation." "I understand," Lena said, and found, to her own surprise, that she meant it completely. Whatever fear lived in her chest, it did not outweigh the strange, steady certainty that she wanted to remain close to this family, close to this dangerous, complicated man who had just revealed more of himself to her in a few sentences than he likely had to anyone in years. The house settled into a tense quiet as the evening wore on, guards stationed at every entrance, Dante moving between rooms with restless energy, checking windows, taking calls, his composure never fully cracking again, but his vigilance unmistakable. Salvatore sat with Lena in the sitting room, his earlier joy dimmed but not entirely extinguished, his hand occasionally finding hers in silent reassurance. "I am sorry," he said at one point, his voice heavy with guilt. "This is my doing, in part. I was so hungry for a piece of home, so desperate to hold on to something that made me feel alive again, that I did not think carefully enough about what it might cost you. You gave me something too," Lena said gently. "Do not carry guilt for that. Whatever happens next, I do not regret a single conversation we have shared." Salvatore squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with emotion he did not bother to hide, and for a while, they sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the low murmur of Dante's voice from the hallway, as he coordinated with his men, the tension in the house a living, breathing thing that none of them could ignore. "Tell me about him," Lena said eventually, needing something to fill the heavy silence. "Not the man he has become, the boy he was, before all of this." Salvatore's face softened at the request, old memories rising visibly behind his eyes. "He was a serious child," he said. "Even before his mother got sick, he thought about things too deeply for a boy his age. He used to ask questions that made grown men uncomfortable, questions about fairness, about why some people struggled while others did not. I used to tell Conchetta that we had somehow raised a philosopher instead of a son." He chuckled softly at the memory, though sorrow lingered underneath the sound. When she passed, that seriousness hardened into something else. He took on responsibilities no young man should have to carry so suddenly, and he did it without complaint, without asking anyone for help, because that is who he has always been. Strong for everyone else, even when it costs him everything inside. "He seems to be carrying a great deal tonight," Lena said quietly. "He has carried a great deal every night for 15 years, Salvatore said. "Tonight is simply the first time in a long while that I have watched him fight to protect something purely for himself, rather than out of duty alone. That matters more than you may realize, Lena. That matters more than either of you understands yet. They sat together a while longer, the quiet punctuated occasionally by the distant sound of a car engine passing on the street outside, each time drawing both their gazes toward the window, until the sound faded again into the ordinary hum of the city at night. Near midnight, Dante finally returned to the sitting room, exhaustion visible in the set of his shoulders, for the first time since Lena had known him. He knelt in front of her chair, taking both her hands in his, with a directness that made Salvatore discreetly excuse himself from the room. The car outside was Moretti's men, Dante said. Confirmed. They wanted us to know they had found you, that they knew where my father lived, that they were willing to come close enough to make their point, without crossing into open conflict, at least for tonight. This will not be the last move they make. What happens now? Lena asked. Now, Dante said, his voice low and steady, I make sure they understand exactly what will happen if they touch either of you. I have spent years trying to keep this family out of open conflict, trying to build something more legitimate than what my father built, but I will not let caution cost me the people I care about most. He paused, his thumb tracing gentle circles against her hand. That includes you, Lena. I am not willing to pretend otherwise any longer, not after tonight, not after everything that has happened. Lena looked into his eyes, seeing past the careful control to the fierce, protective determination underneath, and felt something settle in her chest, despite the danger still hanging over all of them. Then we face it together, she said, whatever comes next. Dante's expression softened at that, and he pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a small gesture that carried more weight than any grand declaration could have. Tomorrow, he said, I will meet with the Moretti family directly. I have avoided that meeting for months, hoping the problem would resolve itself through smaller measures, but I do not have that luxury any longer. I need them to understand, in terms they cannot misinterpret, that this line has already been crossed and will not be crossed again. Is that dangerous? Lena asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Everything about my life is dangerous, Dante said simply. But this particular danger, I know how to manage. I have spent years learning exactly how far men like Enzo Moretti are willing to go, and exactly how to make certain they go no further. Tonight was a warning meant to frighten me into caution. Tomorrow, I intend to answer it with something far more direct. He stood then, drawing Lena up with him, and for a long moment, they simply stood facing each other in the quiet sitting room, the weight of everything unspoken between them, finally settling into something that felt, despite the danger surrounding it, remarkably steady. Stay here tonight, Dante said. There is a guest room upstairs, and I would rest easier knowing you were inside these walls, rather than anywhere Moretti's men might still be watching. Tomorrow, once I have dealt with him, we will figure out what comes next, together, exactly as you said. Lena nodded, too tired and too full of feeling to argue, and allowed him to guide her toward the staircase, Salvatore watching them both with quiet satisfaction from his armchair, as though some long-held hope of his had finally begun, against all odds, to take shape in front of him. Outside, somewhere in the dark streets beyond the stone wall, the threat from the Moretti family still loomed, unresolved and dangerous. But inside the house, something had shifted permanently between the three of them, a bond forged in fear and honesty that none of them intended to let go of easily. Lena woke early the next morning, in an unfamiliar bed, sunlight streaming through tall windows she did not recognize, and it took her several disoriented seconds to remember exactly where she was and why. The events of the previous night rushed back all at once, the tense car outside, the confession in the sitting room, Dante's promise to meet with the Moretti family directly, and her stomach tightened with worry the moment the memory returned in full. She found Salvatore in the kitchen already, brewing coffee with the same careful attention he brought to everything he cooked, though the lines around his eyes suggested he had slept as poorly as she had. He left an hour ago, Salvatore said before she could ask, sliding a cup of coffee toward her across the counter. He did not want to wake you. He said you needed the rest, more than you needed to watch him walk out the door. Where did he go? Lena asked, though she already suspected the answer. To meet with Enzo Moretti, Salvatore said, his expression grim despite his attempt to keep his voice steady, at a location they have used for negotiations before, neutral ground. meant to keep both sides honest. Dante has done this before, Lena. He knows how to handle men like Enzo. But that does not make the waiting any easier. They spent the morning together in tense, quiet companionship, Salvatore attempting small tasks around the kitchen to keep his hands busy, Lena staring at her phone every few minutes, though she had no way of reaching Dante, and knew better than to try. At one point, Salvatore set down the dish towel he had been folding and unfolding without purpose, and simply looked at her, his expression suddenly serious. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to answer honestly, even if the answer frightens you." "Of course," Lena said. "Knowing everything you know now," Salvatore said slowly, "knowing what this family truly is, what dangers come with standing close to us, would you have still spoken to me that first night? Would you still have sat down at that table if you understood everything it might cost you?" Lena thought about the question carefully before answering, unwilling to offer empty reassurance simply to ease his worry. "I do not know if I fully understood what I was walking into," she admitted. "But even now, knowing everything, I would not take back a single conversation we have shared. You gave me something too, Salvatore. You reminded me how much my grandmother's language still lives inside me, how much of her I still carry. That matters more to me than the danger frightens me." Salvatore's eyes grew bright at that, and he reached across the counter to squeeze her hand once, firmly, before returning to his restless tasks, though the set of his shoulders seemed slightly less burdened than it had a moment before. Around midday, Salvatore's own phone rang, and he answered it so quickly, Lena barely saw his hand move. "Yes," he said, his voice tight. A pause. His shoulders, which had been rigid with tension all morning, sagged with visible relief. "Good. Good. Thank you for telling me." He ended the call and turned to Lena, a tired smile breaking across his face. "It is done. Dante is on his way home now. He is unharmed." Relief flooded through Lena so completely that she had to grip the edge of the counter to steady herself. "What happened?" "I will let him tell you," Salvatore said, "but I suspect the Moretti family will not be sending men to watch this house again anytime soon." Dante arrived nearly an hour later, and the moment Lena saw him walk through the front door, she crossed the room without hesitation and wrapped her arms around him, not caring who witnessed the gesture, not caring that only 12 hours earlier she had still been uncertain exactly what existed between them. He held her tightly in return, his face pressed into her hair, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, simply grateful for the solid, undeniable fact of each other's presence. "Tell me what happened," Lena said eventually, pulling back just enough to look at his face. Dante guided her to sit in the kitchen, Salvatore settling into a chair across from them, and began recounting the meeting in a measured voice, though Lena could see the tension of the encounter still lingering behind his eyes. Enzo Moretti had arrived expecting to negotiate from a position of strength, confident that his warning the night before had rattled Dante enough to extract concessions. Instead, Dante had laid out, in careful and unemotional detail, exactly what continued interference would cost the Moretti family, drawing on years of documented grievances, alliances Dante had quietly built with other families who valued stability over conflict, and a clear willingness to abandon decades of restraint if pushed any further. "He believed my caution was weakness," Dante said. "He mistook years of patience for an unwillingness to fight. I made certain he understood the difference before he left that room. Restraint is a choice, not an absence of capability, and I chose, very clearly, to show him exactly what he would be facing if he continued down this path." "And he backed down?" Lena asked. "He backed down," Dante confirmed. "Men like Enzo Moretti respect strength above almost everything else. He needed to see it directly, rather than hear about it secondhand, before he would truly believe it. I do not expect further trouble from his family, not soon, and certainly not aimed at either of you." "Was there a moment," Lena asked carefully, "when you were not certain it would end peacefully?" Dante considered the question for a long moment before answering. "There is always such a moment, in meetings like that one," he said. "Enzo tested me early, suggesting that perhaps my father's age made him vulnerable, that perhaps an old man living alone in a large house was not as protected as he once was. I understood immediately what he was implying. I told him, very plainly, that any harm that came to my father direct or indirect, would end whatever fragile peace still existed between our families permanently, and that I would personally ensure the consequences reached every person he claimed to protect in return. His jaw tightened at the memory. He understood the trade he was being offered. Restraint for restraint, or war for war. He chose restraint, in the end, though I suspect it cost his pride a great deal to do so. You risked a great deal to protect us, Salvatore said quietly. I would risk far more, Dante said, his eyes moving to Lena as he spoke, for either of you. Salvatore reached across the table and gripped his son's shoulder, pride and relief mingling openly in his expression. You handled it exactly as your grandfather would have, he said, with strength, but without needless cruelty. That is not an easy balance to strike, Dante. I am proud of you. Something shifted visibly in Dante at those words. A tension in his shoulders that Lena suspected had been there for years finally easing, if only slightly. He had spent so long, she realized, carrying the weight of his father's legacy and his own uncertain place within it, that simple, direct approval seemed to land with unexpected force. Over the following weeks, life at Rosalinda's slowly returned to something resembling its previous rhythm, though nothing about Lena's world felt entirely the same as it had before that first strange evening. Salvatore continued his regular visits, always requesting her table, his joy and warmth undimmed by the danger they had all weathered together. Dante came more often now too, no longer hiding behind the pretense of reviewing papers or taking calls, simply sitting with his father and Lena during her breaks, the three of them talking easily, in a mixture of English and dialect that had become its own comfortable language between them. Paul Ritchie watched these changes with an expression that shifted gradually from wariness to something closer to acceptance, though he never fully lost the habit of glancing nervously toward the door whenever the black car pulled up outside. Grace, the veteran waitress who had first warned Lena about the weight of what she had stumbled into, eventually stopped offering cautionary advice altogether, replacing it instead with genuine curiosity about how a simple greeting in a nearly forgotten dialect had managed to reshape so many lives so completely. Lena's roommate, Claire, met Dante for the first time during this period, and though she had spent weeks half-jokingly warning Lena that the whole situation sounded far too dramatic to end well, she found herself won over almost immediately by the quiet, careful way he treated Lena, the obvious devotion visible in even his smallest gestures. I take back every worried thing I said, Claire told Lena one night after Dante had walked them both home. I have never seen anyone look at another person the way he looks at you. Whatever danger surrounds this, I do not think you have anything to fear from him. Lena found herself spending more evenings at the Conti house as the weeks passed, learning her way around the kitchen, where Salvatore continued teaching her recipes passed down through generations, learning the quiet corners of the garden, where Dante liked to sit when the weight of his responsibilities grew heavy. Slowly, carefully, the walls that had once made the house feel imposing and unfamiliar began to feel instead like the walls of a place she genuinely belonged, filled with laughter and old stories, and the particular comfort of being known completely, dangers and all. One evening, nearly 2 months after that first fateful encounter, Salvatore arrived at the restaurant, dressed more formally than usual, a small velvet box tucked carefully in his coat pocket that he refused to explain, despite Lena's curious glances throughout the meal. He had called ahead earlier that day, requesting that Paul reserve the entire back section of the restaurant, an unusual request that sent the staff into a flurry of quiet speculation about what exactly the Conti family might be planning. Grace, ever observant, caught Lena's arm before her shift began and whispered that something significant seemed to be unfolding, though neither of them could have guessed the full shape of it. Dante arrived later than usual that evening, dressed impeccably, his usual watchfulness replaced by a nervous energy Lena had never once witnessed from him in all the months she had known him. He kept checking his jacket pocket throughout the early part of the meal, a small, unconscious gesture that Lena noticed but could not interpret, and Salvatore kept exchanging meaningful glances with his son across the table, the two of them clearly sharing some secret they had planned together in advance. When Dante joined them partway through the evening, Salvatore finally rose from his seat, his hands trembling slightly with an emotion that had nothing to do with age. "Lena Marsh," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet restaurant, drawing the attention of nearby tables in a way that felt entirely different from that first tense silence months ago. 2 months ago, you gave an old man back a piece of the home he thought he had lost forever. You gave my son back a warmth I feared he had buried too deep to recover. I have watched you become part of this family in every way that matters, long before either of us found the courage to say so directly. He opened the small velvet box, revealing a delicate silver pendant, shaped like the same spread-winged bird, engraved on the coin he had given her that very first night, and pressed it gently into her palm. This belonged to my mother, he said. It has passed through 3 generations of women who were strong enough to marry into this complicated, difficult family and love it anyway. I would be honored, deeply honored, if you would accept it as a sign that you belong here now, not as a guest, not as a kindness shown to a lonely old man, but as family. Tears filled Lena's eyes as she accepted the pendant, closing her fingers around its familiar shape, remembering the coin Salvatore had pressed into her hand on that very first night when the entire restaurant had gone silent around them. She looked up to find Dante watching her with an expression of open, unguarded emotion that she had never seen from him before. Every wall he had spent years building finally, completely down. "Marry me," he said quietly, kneeling before her without hesitation, his voice steady despite the vulnerability written plainly across his face. "Not because my father has already claimed you as family, though I am grateful he has. Not because of the danger we survived together, though it showed me exactly what I would be willing to risk for you. Marry me because these past 2 months have taught me that the life I thought I had to carry alone was never meant to be carried that way, and I do not want to spend another day pretending otherwise." The restaurant, once again, fell completely silent. Every eye in the room turned toward the small booth in the back, where an old man's loneliness had first opened a door 2 months earlier, a door that had led, against every warning and every danger, to exactly this moment. "Yes," Lena said, her voice breaking with joy, as Dante rose to pull her into his arms, the restaurant erupting into spontaneous applause around them, Salvatore laughing and crying simultaneously as he embraced them both together. Later that evening, long after the celebration had settled into quiet, contented conversation, Lena stood near the front window of Rosalinda's, with the silver pendant resting against her collarbone, watching the evening lights of the city glow beyond the glass. Dante came to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist, and together they looked out at a world that had once seemed so full of danger and uncertainty, now settling instead into something that finally, after everything, felt entirely and completely like home. "My father has not stopped smiling all evening," Dante said softly, glancing back toward the booth where Salvatore sat, surrounded by staff members offering their congratulations, his face bright with a joy that seemed to grow only brighter with every passing hour. "Neither have you," Lena pointed out, smiling up at him. "I have very good reason," Dante said, pulling her closer against him. 2 months ago, I was a man who believed he had buried every soft part of himself for the sake of survival. I did not think there was room left in my life for anything beyond duty and vigilance. You proved me wrong about that, Lena, in the most unexpected way imaginable, simply by walking up to a table and speaking words my father had not heard in 20 years. Your father proved something too, Lena said, that it is never too late to let people back in, even after loss convinces you otherwise. They stood together a while longer, watching the city lights, listening to the warm hum of celebration behind them, and when Salvatore finally called them back to the table to toast their future with the last of the wine, Lena walked toward him with Dante's hand firmly in hers, certain, for the first time in longer than she could remember, exactly where she belonged.